And you are all set, Cindy.
Okay, thank you so much, Jennifer. Well, good morning, everyone. It's great to see so many faces bright and early on a Friday morning. Welcome to Leveraging Suny Micro-Credentials to Meet Changing Needs. My name is Cynthia Proctor. I'm from Suny System, and I am joined by three campus experts, Deb Pernat from Suny Cobleskill, Ed Bever from Suny Old Westbury, and Mindy Kole from Suny Ulster. I'm excited to have you hear from them about the terrific work that they're doing in micro-credentials. I'm going to get us started with just a brief overview of micro-credentials in general and Suny's policy. I just want to make sure that everyone has sort of the foundation about Suny's policy efforts. Okay. First, let's just talk about what micro-credentials are. At the most basic level, micro-credentials are credentials, and micro is the key word. They're small. They're groups of courses or coursework that are smaller than a minor, smaller than a certificate or a degree, and they're more narrow in focus. In fact, you could have micro-credentials stack one on top of another to amass enough credits to earn a certificate or a degree. The content of a given micro-credential is selected because it verifies specific skills and competencies that have been mastered. People use micro-credentials to help them meet academic and career goals and to help them stand out in a competitive job market. There are for-credit micro-credentials, non-credit, and even pathways for moving from non-credit to credit in the micro-credential space. And they can be offered online, face-to-face, or hybrid. So people always say to me, okay, well, you know, that sounds nice, but what are you really talking about? What does it look like? I've put some examples here. These are taken from Suny micro-credentials, and you'll hear about some of them today. But you might see a typical micro-credential comprised of three credit courses, okay, so for a total of 9 credits. You might even see a micro-credential that's a series of 3 credit courses. So you might have part 1, part 2, and part 3 that advance a student. You might see a micro-credential that is 2 for-credit courses plus an applied learning experience. We even have examples of full degree programs that have been broken down into 4 and 5 micro-credentials with the idea of allowing students to take the content in sort of bite-sized pieces, right? So they don't have to commit to the whole thing at once, right? They can see how they do and then progress. You might also see several non-credit courses or a non-credit program or even a boot camp that comprise a micro-credential. And one of the exciting things about this work at Suny is we have in place a prior learning assessment policy, the award of academic credit by evaluation. So our faculty could look at the work that a student is doing on the non-credit side and evaluate it for credit in a degree program. So that's an exciting piece of the micro-credential space. In many cases, at Suny in particular, successful completion of a micro-credential is represented with a digital badge. So the micro-credential is the credential, but the digital badge tells people what you've achieved and what you've mastered in completing your micro-credential. So we sort of have a sense of what they are. Why, right? Why did Suny first start talking about micro-credentials? Well, we started this back in 2018, well, maybe even a little before that. And we were thinking about ways to solve challenges, right? So we knew that there was a growing demand for lifelong learning, right? Everyone was telling us that, you know, people are going to need to continuously upskill. We knew that there was lots of talk about a skills gap Maybe some of it was a perceived skills gap. Maybe some of it was a real skills gap. Were students coming out of college with the skills that they needed to jump into the job market and hit the ground running? We also knew that there was a projected decline in the high school population, right? So we started thinking about, well, how could SUNY maybe serve adult learners and serve the over 6 million folks in New York State who have no college or some college, but no credential. And so that was really sort of how we started. And then COVID came. And we added some additional challenges to the mix, right? So we saw, for example, there are far fewer students graduating from high school and going immediately to college, right? 22% fewer high school graduates from the class of 2020 enrolled in college this fall. And that number increases significantly when you talk about students coming from low-income school districts. We also have heard all about folks who have lost their jobs because of the pandemic, who find themselves unemployed or underemployed, or whose job is changing as their business or organization tried to adapt to the pandemic. And here again, there was a potential to attract adult learners because recent studies have told us that this population that has been impacted by the pandemic is thinking about going back to school, and they're interested in shorter term flexible options. The good news is pre-pandemic, mid-pandemic, and yes, there will be a post-pandemic, I hope. SUNY's policy framework that the SUNY trustees adopted covers all, right? It was intentionally designed to be a broad framework and to think about multiple types of micro-credentials. So that's really sort of where I came up with the title for this session. The issues that you were dealing with prior to the pandemic, the issues that you're dealing with now, there is space with within SUNY micro-credentials to meet some of those challenges and take advantage of opportunities. There are 6 components to the policy framework. Very important is a SUNY specific definition and related taxonomy. We created guiding principles for micro-credential development. We said that micro-credentials would be approved by faculty governance, that they would be collaboratively developed, that we would be transparent and effective in communicating micro-credentials. And as I mentioned, we would allow for multiple types of micro-credentials, and I'll touch on that in a minute. So SUNY's policy framework, I can tell you, even today, is still unique within New York State and nationally, in particular because we did set a specific definition, because we are involving faculty governance, because we are focusing on multiple credential types. I'm going to talk a little bit about SUNY micro-credential definition. Just want to make sure that we're all on the same page with that. At SUNY, right, a micro-credential is competency-based. It verifies that specific skills and competencies have been achieved. This means that there are associated learning outcomes and assessments, and that these are actual, real learning experiences. SUNY micro-credentials have to be endorsed by the issuing campus. They have to be developed through faculty governance. And when we first started out, we talked about the fact that they had to be meaningful and of high quality. And I always thought that sounded, very sort of motherhood and apple pie. But what does it really mean? And I think we probably didn't really know what it meant at the beginning, but we've come to learn that it really means, being strategic about how we roll out micro-credentials. Just like anything else we do, we want to develop micro-credentials for a reason, right? Not just to create them because we can, but because they will add real value to students. And in that same vein, we want them to be portable. So we want students to be able to share that they've earned micro-credentials, and we do that by documenting them on a transcript and or having a digital badge. And we also want micro-credentials to be stackable. And when I say that, I mean we want them to be pathways wherever possible for a student to advance their higher education. So we could have micro-credentials, as I mentioned, stacking to an associate degree, micro-credentials stacking at the baccalaureate level, master's, and doctoral level. So if we take these 4 areas, this SUNY micro-credential definition, this is what sets SUNY apart. And I think we have yet to really, to fully live up to the potential of all we can do with this framework, in part because the pandemic interrupted a lot of what we've been doing, right, for all of us. I mentioned that we have key principles. I won't go into them here. You can see them here. They align with the definition. If you're thinking about developing micro-credentials, you need to follow the principles. We want everyone to be thinking about the different types of micro-credentials that they can offer. You can have micro-credentials that add skill sets complementary to a student's major. So the computer science major taking a business communications micro-credential, the accounting major taking a cybersecurity micro-credential. We also want to use micro-credentials to motivate students to persist. So you could take 3 courses that are particularly challenging or that maybe represent the latest work in the field and recognize them through a micro-credential. Also, we think micro-credentials could be an access point to or back to higher education. And then lots of potential for really addressing emerging employer needs, upskilling incumbent workers, retraining, ongoing professional development. Let me just tell you where we are now. We have 19 campuses that have micro-credentials up and running. In fact, my thanks for those of you joining today who helped update our list of micro-credentials just recently. We are in the process of cataloging our micro-credentials, and we're going to be launching a new SUNY micro-credential website to help share the good news. We have 4 additional campuses that I know of that are in the planning stages, and there could be others. And we're still going through, I've got a couple of requests into campuses with this latest tally that I did, but we're approaching about 200 micro-credentials up and running. We've done very well in terms of local media recognizing campuses for launching micro-credentials. We've also done very well with getting grant support for SUNY micro-credentials from NIH, from the Federal Health and Human Services Office. So we've made progress. There is still more that we can do, right? And as I mentioned, a number of campuses hit the pause button when on micro-credential projects. I think now they're really starting to ramp up again, which is exciting. So we'll see continued campus refinement, new campuses coming on board. We know that there's, and you'll hear about this today, a need for support with marketing and professional development. There's a big communications challenge around micro-credentials, getting everybody to understand what they are, what they're not, how to use them. We want to do an inventory and identify gaps, in part because we want to better define our niche in the national and international landscape. And I'm just going to spend 2 seconds on this because you could do a whole session on this. There are lots of folks that are in this space that are offering micro-credentials on various platforms, some of which Suny is involved in too, both in the United States and internationally. But there is room for Suny to really stand out. And I'm excited that you're going to hear some examples of the work already underway. And so with that, I am going to turn things over to Deb.
Good morning, everyone. I'm very excited to be here with you today. And I'm going to discuss how Suny Cobleskill started in offering micro-credentials. And to go off of what Cindy said, we actually put our micro-credential initiative into overdrive when the pandemic hit. So in May of 2020, the micro-credential team was established by our president, Dr. Marian Terenzio, with the directive to explore and develop micro-credentials. So our immediate responses were to research micro-credentials and badges. That meant participating in trainings through acclaimed Credly, the badging platform, attend workshops and webinars, develop processes and policies for both credit-bearing and non-credit MCs, which we used the Suny guidelines for. We had to establish the industry needs for what micro-credentials are necessary. And of course, the next task was to help educate the faculty on our campus to inform them of what micro-credentials are, why these are important, and how to develop them. The next step was to promote these opportunities and spread the word. Cindy, can you change the slide? Just to make a note, the MCs that are in bold are offered online. The ones in an asterisk are non-credit. Some of these micro-credentials are courses that we have successfully offered in the past and we have a strong reputation for. And also the need is in our community or in the industry. Two great examples of this are artificial insemination in cattle and meat processing and food safety. Many of you know we are Suny Cobleskill College of Agriculture and Technology. We are in a rural setting and our demands and focuses are very different than, let's say, in an urban setting. These hands-on courses allow individuals to really hone in on specific skills and competencies. Can you change the slide again, Cindy? To piggyback off of what Cindy said earlier, another great reason we offer some of these micro-credentials are flexibility for students to start on a few courses to achieve a micro-credential and then take another micro-credential, eventually leading into a degree, hence using the stackable model. The third reason is the reverse. Some of our student population start a degree, are successful in the major field requirements, but struggle with the other coursework. This allows them to leave Cobleskill with a credential to recognize their achievements. Our hope is that one day they will return to Cobleskill since they already have a credential with us. And I did put our website, which we're going to switch to now, for your reference. So when we developed the webpage, we wanted to cover several points. First, we wanted to educate individuals on what a micro-credential is and a badge and why they are important. We also wanted to break out the micro-credentials into areas of interest. We all know when we go into a website, we go directly to what we are interested in. Each micro-credential page has all of the important information. Who is our audience? How is the delivery of this MC? Credit or non-credit, skills attained, timing of completion, degrees in which the MC align to, and the organizations this micro-credential is affiliated with. as you can see, we have an inquiry form embedded so we can retain their information and communicate with these individuals. I look forward to our further discussion today. You're on mute, Cindy.
Thank you so much, Deb. As I've said, we've done a little bit of a disservice to Deb because, her webpage is really vertical, right? So we tried to carve it up a little bit so you can see all the components. But I think actually that this is really a model because it easily tells a student, just about everything they need to know about their micro-credentials. So I'm very excited about their webpage. All right, with that said, let's turn now to Old Westbury.
Hi, I'm Ed Bever, the director of the School of Professional Studies at Old Westbury, and I'm sort of administering the micro-credentials. I was involved in creating them, the preliminary work, and now we administer them. I gave a little bit of a timeline here to get you an idea of how we got up and running. In May of 2018, sort of stimulated by the Suny report, our faculty and administration created a task force I was co-chair of. And over the summer, we worked on a report and recommendations, which we delivered to governance. And after a little bit of back and forth and refinement, it went to the Senate and was authorized in concept in February of 2019. And the first 3 specific micros were approved in May, 2 in graduate taxation and 1 in undergraduate counseling psychology. All of our micros are 4 credit at this point. One of the things we were working on, which has been slowed down by the pandemic, is the idea of doing non-credit ones. We have a couple of proposals floating around, but we haven't actually formulated policies for them or created a structure or issued any. So we have 4 credit. There are 2 to 4 courses and a grade of B or better to essentially say that the student has met the learning outcomes of the course. And those are the learning outcomes of the micro, are the course's learning outcomes. The infrastructure to begin offering them was put into place over the summer, so they were offered in the fall. We use Credly, and there's an application on the website and information and application on the website and in our portal. We have an email address where people can communicate and submit proposals. So that all was set up. And as I say, temporarily administered by the School of Professional Studies. The idea is eventually it should be transferred to the registrar's office primarily, at least for the handling of the details of applications and awards. But for the moment, Banner and Degree Works don't support that. So that's part of the reason why it stays with me. And I'm hoping that Banner, Lucian, and whoever it is who does Degree Works are working on modules to incorporate micros. So anyway, 3 more were approved in February in TV and video production, 3 in May, 2 in neuropsychology, and 1 in nonprofit administration. The last one coming from my unit, which was my original inspiration for getting into this, because I had the 2 courses and I thought they would be perfect micro. And then I had to help create the structure in which they exist. Next slide, please. So the last 2, the latest, were approved in December of last year, 1 in professional workplace skills, again from professional studies, and 1 in Spanish translation from our modern languages department. You can see an overview. We've had 68 total applications. 24 of these were denied, and I'll explain that in a minute. 21 of them are in process, 23 have been awarded, and of those awarded, 22 have been accepted. You know, when a badge is generated through Credly, they send out emails to the student with announcement and instructions on how to use the badge in LinkedIn or in an email or on a website. And 22 of the 23 people it was awarded to accepted theirs and have basically taken possession of them. So the salient points, I think, are 1, there seems to be a significant interest, both the absolute numbers of applications, which I think is quite a good number for something that's all as new as this is. And we'll talk about that in a minute more too. and also the acceptance rate. And the next thing, as Cynthia mentioned, COVID significantly delayed the approval and startup. We had some controversy about some of the rules governing how far back students could go to count courses and things. And it took a long time to get people to focus on that, which I think it would have been 3 or 4 months. In other words, a semester quicker if it hadn't been for COVID sort of bogging everything down. And the high number of rejected applications is a result of how they were publicized. So if I can have the next slide. Um, the way that information has been disseminated, we have a website similar to what Cobleskill has, not quite as nice perhaps, but it has information about them in a way that students can express interest. And we also have a form in the portal for our existing students. There was a banner announcement about their existence, a set of web pages. I was interviewed by the student newspaper when they were first created. The main means of publicizing them, though, for me has been emails to students. At the end of the fall of 2019 and the end of the spring 2020 semesters, I went through the course lists of the courses that made up the micros that we had that we could award, and I sent emails to everybody who qualified. It was a kind of labor intensive thing. I had my secretary helping me with it, looking up people's records. I saw it as kind of priming the pump. I don't intend to do this every semester, but I thought that, rather than a generic announcement that people might or might not see in the student newsletter and that sort of thing, I would approach people specifically who qualified for them. And then the reason there were so many rejections was I sent a mass email at the end of December, because we have a rule that you have to be an enrolled student in order to apply for a micro. And we had a bunch of students who were graduating who didn't know that we had just resolved the issue about how far back you could go and what the qualifications were. And if they graduated, they would technically not be eligible to apply. We actually had to retroactively open applications to students who graduated in May and August. So I sent out a mass email to every student who was graduating, and I thought laid out very carefully what the qualifications for each micro were. But I got a whole bunch of applications, which I immediately looked at the people's transcripts and said, they haven't taken any of the courses for this and they're about to graduate. So I contacted them and said, thank you for your interest, but we're sorry, but unless you want to stay on as a non-matric later, you're not going to be able to complete this. So that's why there were that many rejections. I think it was a very crude publicity approach, but it was just something I had to do, or else they would have been, if there had been any, they would have been out of luck. So the upshot is that COVID really disrupted plans to expand publicity. I was anticipating doing a lot of internal marketing to our own students. I was also planning to try to use a little bit of marketing money with our publicity department and get the word out to various sectors, and employment sectors and students or potential students as non-matrics. We do have a couple of non-matrics. The business taxation has 2 people who came back specifically to become non-matriculated students who've applied for micros and therefore able to take the relevant courses. The next step, I think, is going to be a much more vigorous marketing effort. And I was going to say, this is something that I hope that all of us across Suny can promote, because I think the very idea of micros is still very novel. A lot of students don't have any idea of what they are or why they should be interested in them. And so anything that you do for yourself will help me, and everything I do for me will help you, as it creates a kind of culture of micro-credentials and a general awareness of them. And then, of course, for specific ones, we have different uses. Some of ours, the psychology ones, are kind of tracks within the psychology major primarily, although somebody might come in and take the counseling skills one if they are interested, even if they're not psych majors. We just made the workplace skills micro, professional skills for the workplace micro and professional studies, which is designed for non-matriculated students to upskill. The Spanish translation, I think, is primarily for Spanish majors, but still will give them a very palpable, specific credential as they graduate. So we're using lots of ways, and we need to market it in different ways to appeal to the different constituencies. Okay.
Thank you so much, Ed. Now let's turn to Mindy.
Good morning. I'm happy to be here with everyone. Thank you so much. My name is Mindy Kole. I'm with Suny Ulster. We are one of the small community colleges in the system. We're located, we have 2 campuses, one in Stone Ridge, New York, and one in Kingston, downtown Kingston. Mindy? Thank you. So I was going to talk a little bit today about our process, how we implemented micro-credentials at Suny Ulster. And I want to start by saying thank goodness for the Suny guidelines, because those guidelines really provided an excellent foundation for us to understand what we needed to do at Suny Ulster in order to implement micro-credentials. So we're very grateful, and we stick with the guidelines to the letter. And that has really made the process much simpler than if we had to develop guidelines ourselves. So that was just a wonderful start. We have many opportunities to talk with businesses in our community, nonprofits, manufacturing companies, other organizations, and a lot of our micro-credentials, or pretty much all of our efforts, are based on these conversations with community partners on their needs. So for instance, one example is our micro-credential accounting computer skills. Well, the business department at Suny Ulster has an advisory board that we meet with in person, and then we continue to communicate on an ongoing basis whenever we need input from the business community on something that we're thinking about offering or doing. And in one of our meetings with our advisory council, they said, you know, students come to us with their resumes and they say that they're proficient in Excel, or they say they're proficient in QuickBooks, and that proficiency varies quite a bit. And so we would really like something from Suny Ulster that would really, you know, certify that a student is proficient in those important business tools if they're going to put them on their resume. So from that conversation in a meeting with our advisory council, we put together a micro-credential on accounting computer skills, which is based on 4 courses, 2 in Excel and 2 in QuickBooks, which are in our business degrees, our AAS in Business and Entrepreneurial Studies. So we really go to the community for their needs and then develop micro-credentials to meet those needs. It's really important, I think, to kind of have a campus cheerleader, exactly for what Ed was saying and Deb before. There's really an education process. So for one person or a small team of people to really understand micro-credentials and be able to answer all the questions and keep the conversation going and work closely with faculty one-on-one as they're thinking about micro-credentials really helps move the effort along. And I think that that is part of what worked at Suny Ulster. At the beginning, you know, I would make presentations at the Academic Senate to try to raise the awareness and the education level of everyone at Suny Ulster so that we understood the guidelines from Suny, we understood what micro-credentials are and how to think about them, how to approach them, how to talk to community partners about them. And that, I think, was very helpful too. And then, as I said, I email faculty every once in a while and just remind them that I'm here to help with them with their micro-credentials, meet with them, brainstorm, explain the guidelines, and really kind of like be the campus coach for developing the micro-credential. All of our micro-credentials need to go before the curriculum committee, which is a subcommittee of the Senate, and needs to be approved by the curriculum committee, just like any other certificates or degrees or changes to certificates, changes to degrees. And then once it's approved by the curriculum committee, it is put out for comment through the whole, with the whole campus, and then it needs to be signed off on by our Dean of Academic Affairs and the president of our college. So there is, good tight governance for the development and approval of micro-credentials at SUNY Ulster. Mindy? So just like the other campuses, COVID really hit us with this. I do have to say, it's been really challenging the last year to keep the attention on micro-credentials going, to keep people thinking about developing new credentials, faculty on developing new credentials, marketing to students. It's been really hard because we've just had to adjust to this remote environment, and there's been so much focus on so many other things, like retention and admission and functioning in a Zoom environment and all these things, that it really has been quite challenging. Having said that, though, what I have seen an increase for in our community is a demand for more short-term skill-based education. So we've kind of taken the micro-credentials in a little bit of a different direction this year and have been successful in that approach. So going forward, we need to revive the attention on our campus. We need to revive reminding our faculty, what micro-credential is and what it can do for students. We need to up the marketing to students, and Ed had some great ideas that I'm going to try at SUNY Ulster, so I appreciate that, in order to reach students. But I'll tell you next slide about some of the things that we have been able to do in the COVID environment. So what we have been able to do is we worked with one of our local community hospitals, and they have sent 17 employees across the hospital in all areas of the hospital to SUNY Ulster for our leadership micro-credential, which is part of our business program. It's an online micro-credential, and there are 3 courses in the micro-credential. The first one is a course in leadership, and what we did was we customized that course to be completely focused on leadership within the healthcare profession. So consequently, all the reading, all the videos, all of the discussions, everything was focused on the healthcare profession. So that was a completely customized course. While that was successful, COVID also has really, exhausted the employees of Ellenville Regional Hospital and all of our healthcare professions. So we are in the process of scheduling the second course of the 3. I'm sure they will continue, but they needed to take half a term to kind of regroup at the hospital. So they completed the first course of the 3, and now we're working with them to schedule the other 2. At the same time, we have another hospital system that is not a community, it was a community hospital, but is now part of a very large hospital network. And we are discussing the leadership micro-credential with them to bring it to the second hospital. Before COVID hit, we worked with a local resort on a customer service micro-credential. And as you can imagine, the hospitality industry in Ulster County has been hit extremely hard by COVID. And so that micro-credential exists, but was not implemented yet. So just a couple of days ago, someone from our SBDC who works with this resort contacted me and said, could we talk about reviving this with them as we start to come out of the pandemic? So I'm thrilled about that, because that was a tremendous amount of work on their part and our part to put that customer service micro-credential in place. And so I'm very eager for us to work with them to actually implement it. That one includes an internship with the resort. So they're hoping that current employees as well as new employees will take the micro-credential. The last part is an internship, which will then lead to hopefully employment. So we have quite a few in the business area. We have quite a few in the STEM area, and here are some of the micro-credentials listed here that we have in STEM. We also have several in computer science, and we have one being worked on in our networking area. So I guess my conclusion is that while COVID really did hit the program hard, it did lead to some pretty interesting opportunities that I am hoping will grow as we come out of the pandemic.
Okay, thank you so much to our panelists. I so appreciate it. And I am happy to open things up for questions. I see there's a lot of chat activity. Jennifer, do you have a recommendation for how best to handle questions?
Wait one, I'm going to scroll back here a little bit. Looks like there's just a lot of chat between people, which some questions being answered internally. There's a question, is Ulster doing anything with solar installation via micro-credentials?
Not that I know of. I have not heard of that. I can ask our continuing ed area because I know they're very active in the green energy field, but I've not heard of anything on that.
Okay, and I see another question regarding one of the PowerPoint slides. One slide showed that New Zealand and the EU have or plan a national micro-credential systems. Is there anything comparable for the US or even with New York State? Do the MCs have to be approved by the New York State Education Department? Is the perceived value of the MC just dependent on the reputation of the institution? I know there's a lot there, so if you need me to go back.
Sure. Well, I will share, I don't think she's able to join today, but there is a project underway that involves the State Education Department, the Middle States Commission or accrediting body, Suny, CUNY, to talk about recognizing life experience with micro-credentials. And so that project is led by Nan Travers from Empire State College. And her goal is to have a national model similar to what we're seeing in Europe and Canada. I don't know if we'll get there, but there is a lot of interest in building on some of the policy work that Suny has done in setting sort of standards that would translate across institutions at a minimum in New York State, but hopefully beyond. SUNY micro-credentials do not need to be approved by the State Education Department. And I think the rigor really comes from two things. One is the fact that we have this policy framework that has been endorsed by the SUNY trustees, and that we have a specific definition that requires a review process equal to the process that new degree programs go through, meaning that it has to go through faculty governance, it has to be endorsed by the leadership of the institution has to support the micro-credential. So, so I think that we've really addressed the quality and rigor issue. All of the feedback that I've had from the business community is that they're incredibly supportive and that they recognize the rigor and value. So I hope that answers your question.
I see that someone mentioned that ESF has developed a Coursera course on solar energy PV installation. So that might be another option if somebody was looking for that information. Okay. Susan's asking, what would you say is the timeline for conception to approval of the MC program? Might be more for campuses.
I would say for Old Westbury, it was basically from conception, you know, official conception May, official approval February of the next year, so 3/4 of a year. that was pretty aggressive, and there had been some talk about it beforehand. I gave a presentation based on the draft proposal that came through the fact committee. And then I gave another presentation based on the final report and to the cabinet as well as to faculty governance. So it was a little over a year, including just getting to know that these things existed and stuff. But it doesn't have to take long. And I just wanted to say, apropos of the SED, one of the things I love about micro-credentials is the fact that they are entirely campus-based. And I think that the Suny support framework has been very, very helpful. And as you say, not only as a guideline, but also as a kind of proof of concept, of proof that they have rigor. But the fact that the campus, to create, and we also have to go through our curriculum committee and then from there to our Senate. But once a program submits it, it goes to the next CAP meeting, and then it goes to the Senate, and then it gets, so it could go from submission to approval in about 12 weeks, and that's being generous, depending on the timing of the Senate meetings. But it's something that can be done quite quickly, and that makes it very flexible, and I think that's really invaluable in the current environment for higher education.
Deb, do you want to answer that too? You went through, I think, a very targeted approach to development. So you brought a number of micro-credentials at once to your Senate.
Yes, we did. So it does help that the president was on board and really pushing this initiative, and the cabinet. So we were able to, I think we pushed the month of May, we worked around the clock. The micro-credential team worked around the clock to push out 19 proposals that went to curriculum committee. So they first went through the departments, then they supported it, approved it, went to curriculum committee. Curriculum committee either approved them or then, said, these are our recommendations. So we made those, but they gave us a very tight timeline to turn those changes around, which was actually very nice because we were able to get 17 approved, within really, 2 months. So it did help that everybody was on board, and really we gained momentum there and were able to turn out a lot of micro-credentials. And that was really the start of it. So we were lucky.
Yeah, and I think, just add to that, most campuses have developed local policies and practices and forms and, processes. And once that work is done, once you've gotten a few through governance, things move a lot faster, right? Mm-hmm. So, there's definitely some hard work up front, but you get there.
Chris Merlo had his hand up and wanted to ask a question. Chris.
Hi, thank you. Chris Merlo. I am the chair of the curriculum committee at Nassau Community College, and I honestly know very little about all this. Some of my other colleagues are here in this meeting, and they know more about it, and so maybe they have some of these answers. But I typed one question to Ed, and he answered it already, about why students needed at Old Westbury to apply for micro-credentials, and if that's something that the rest of you at your other campuses also have. And then I have another question for anybody whose micro-credentials include non-credit courses. And the question is, what, if anything, you do to sort of gauge whether students have completed what they need to complete in order to earn that micro-credential? Thanks.
I know, Mindy, you have a good answer to that question about the non-credit piece.
Yeah, if we have students in the class that have non-credit or are non-credit, they still have to take the course as if they were a credit student. So they're taking the exams, they're doing the homework, they're taking the finals, and they're getting a grade, so that then if they do in the future decide to come and seek a degree, a credit-bearing degree, we can use the PLA process in order to give them credit for that course. So if they're just, you know, if they're non-credit, non-matriculated, auditing the class, they're still participating fully.
I appreciate that answer, but that's not what I meant. What I meant is,
Sorry.
no, but thank you. That was very helpful. If there's a micro-credential that has a non-credit course built into the micro-credential,
Okay.
where there's not necessarily, you know, exams and assessment, how do you tell whether the student has completed what they have to complete in that course?
Okay, I apologize. I misunderstood.
No, don't.
We don't have, I don't have
Okay.
an answer for that one. So one of my colleagues.
I do. So I am in the professional and continuing education office at Cobleskill. And we do offer a variety of non-credit programs, but we do have a pre-test and a post-test in order to gauge that assessment. So
Great.
just because they completed those doesn't mean that, you know, they have to successfully complete them and get, you know, whatever the grade may be, you know, set by the instructor, an 80 or above.
Great.
So we
Thank
do
you.
have those assessments built into the non-credit micro-credentials.
Yeah, I was just going to say that's a major issue on our campus about non-credit micros, is that they do need to have some kind of specific assessment of the individual student. We had a leadership program where students just had to go to a certain number of events on campus to get a certificate from our student affairs department. And they wanted to make that a micro, but that sort of got hung up on the fact that while the sessions are assessed and the program is assessed that it meets goals, individual students aren't assessed on their achievement of the specific learning outcomes. And so we decided that those are sort of a different class of things. They can use our badging system to issue a badge that says, yes, this person is a silver level participant because they went to 20 events, but it isn't a micro because it doesn't have that specific student hasn't been assessed that they achieved specific learning outcomes. That's kind of the divide that we make and we think that's in keeping with the SUNY guidelines.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the general rule of thumb when we're talking about non-credit micro-credentials is they have to have learning outcomes, they have to have assessments, just straightforward.
And Chris, your other question was the applications or forms that you have do we actually use those forms for students to complete?
Yeah, that was surprising to me. Like if someone's already taking classes, or like if they just want to be non-matric and sign up for a couple of classes, like why there would be an extra set of paperwork or whatever, just to apply to the micro-credential.
If I may, I'd like to answer that.
Sure.
So at this point, it's hard, and my colleagues and I have discussed this on our calls, but there is no tracking in, you know, certain software or networks that we use or platforms. So for us at Cobleskill, we use Banner Web. There is no tracking system, and I think Ed alluded to that earlier. There's no real tracking system. So for us, yes, it's kind of a pain because the students have to complete another form and submit it, but it is a way of us tracking those students and making sure that they're meeting, you know, each requirement of the micro-credential, and that we're, you know, helping to advise them at the very least, and so that we can count them in our tallies.
So are you, like, is this micro-credential, like whether a student completed it or not, I'm hearing that that's sort of an outside of Banner process and that you guys are sort of doing that in your own offices? All right.
Yeah. Can I just say from the student's point of view, getting a micro is very different than just completing some courses. In the first place, it shows up immediately. We bestow them. You don't have to graduate like with a minor that goes along with a major at the end of 4 years. But the other thing is, you know, the badges in Credly are very powerful because they have icons which the person can embed in their social media or electronic presence. And then those are clickable. They go to the Credly site where there is a page that's devoted to that micro that says the learning outcomes and the skills that are developed, and a little bit of description, a link to the college's website so that a potential employer or a grad program could check out and see that we are accredited, we are a state institution, et cetera, et cetera. And there's also a link to a supporting page on our website that has more information about the micro. It links to pages about the micros in general at Old Westbury, and the skills tags that Credly have link to job postings and our search terms that employers use when they're looking for somebody with a specific skill set, like somebody looking for freelancers. Might well be looking, for skills which you've tagged, and similarly for a full-time job, if there are people looking in LinkedIn or what have you, and you have a micro in there, that highlights the skills that the student has made. So I think it's very much more than just, oh, this person took these 3 courses. So for a non-matric, it's really a tangible, palpable award at the end that has real value. Beyond just the knowledge that they gain. I mean, that's obviously the backbone of it, but these other things I think are important.
Yeah, thank you.
We have one more question I want to see if we can answer before we wrap up, from Brenda. She's asking, are market analysis industry needs assessment results available in which campuses can access?
Yes. In fact, there are a number of studies just coming out now about industries impacted by the pandemic and where we're seeing sort of declines in job availability and where we're seeing interest. Burning Glass has partnered with a number of higher education organizations to do some of the studies. The Congressional Research Budget Office is doing some things. We are in the process now. I mentioned we are going to be relaunching our website, which is suny.edu/micro-credentials, no hyphen. If you just Google Suny micro-credentials, it pops up. There are a number of resources there, sort of, historical resources, some available market research, but we will be launching an entirely new section on market research, sort of pandemic related, and then sort of what we're seeing in fields maybe not as impacted by the pandemic, just ongoing trends.
Okay, the rest of the chat is a lot of question and answer between folks, so I think we covered all the questions. And I think we are at time. So thank you all for participating.
Can I just make one closing note, which is I'm available to come to campuses virtually or, as we get things settled in person, to talk with faculty groups. If you have questions, if you want to brainstorm, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. Cynthia.proctor@suny.edu. Always happy to help and answer questions. I love talking with campus faculty, and I think it helps sometimes for them to have someone to throw tomatoes at and ask the tough questions and have their concerns addressed.
Thanks, Cindy, and thanks to your wonderful panel for being here to show these campus experiences and to learn from those about this activity. It was very well done. Thank you very much to all of you, to the panelists, and to you, Cindy, for moderating. That was great. Maybe if you could pop your email in the chat, Cindy, that would be helpful for folks who are here. So this is the last day of the summit, and I'm so glad to see so many folks with us here bright and early. I want to mention that right now at 10 o'clock, we are going to transition into our online teaching ambassadors recognition. And then I just want to mention the other 2 presentations for the day, one at 11 with Patrice Prusco and Whitney Kilgore. That's more of a workshop, so you can check the program and see if that's something something you're interested in. And then our last session of the day at 1 o'clock is a coffee hour sponsored by the Doodle community. And we're going to just kind of reflect on the whole summit in that session and think about post-COVID, what happens next. So I hope you will stay, plugged in and tuned in and join us for that session too. So yeah, again, thanks Cindy and the panel.